All right, let me lay this out. It's been a year since my life spun out of control, and I need to get this off my chest. Never thought I'd end up writing this, but here I am, completely blindsided by the people who should have had my back. My family turned on me in a way I could never have predicted, and it all started with my friend's sister. I've known Luke for years. We grew up together, lived a few blocks apart, and hung out pretty regularly. He's got a younger sister, Sarah, who was always around, but we weren't close. You know how it is. You're friends with someone, so you're friendly with their family. That's how it was with Sarah. She was different, though. Luke never got into the details, but it was clear she had some mental health struggles. People in our circle knew, and we didn't pry. It wasn't our place. A year ago, Sarah reached out to me. Totally out of the blue, she tells me she's pregnant. But wait, it gets worse. She claims I'm the father. My first reaction? Pure confusion. I mean, what? I'd never even been close to her in any romantic or physical way. Not once. And here she is, hitting me with a bombshell, telling me I'm the dad of a baby that couldn't possibly be mine. I tried to keep calm, thinking maybe this was part of her mental health issues, but deep down, I was freaking out. I told her straight up, "Sarah, we've never even hugged, let alone slept together. This doesn't make sense." But she kept insisting I was the father. It was like talking to a wall. She repeated it over and over again, almost like she believed I'd suddenly remember something that never happened. The more she pushed, the more my anxiety grew. I didn't want to be harsh with her, knowing she had her struggles, but I also didn't want to get caught up in something that could destroy my life. Things escalated quickly. I asked her to take a prenatal paternity test. If she was so sure I was the dad, then why not prove it? But she refused. She started saying stuff like, "You need to be there for your child," and "You're abandoning us before the baby's even born." It felt like emotional blackmail. I made my position clear. No test, no deal. I wasn't about to get legally tied to a child that wasn't mine. Seemed like common sense to me, . But here's where things went completely off the rails. My parents found out. Now, I love my parents, but they're old school, big on traditional values. When they heard about Sarah's claim, they didn't ask me for my side. They didn't even consider that she might be making it up. They just flipped out. They called me every name in the book: deadbeat, liar, disgrace. It didn't matter what I said. They were convinced I'd done something shameful, and their disappointment was unbearable. I tried explaining that Sarah was wrong, that we'd never been involved like that. But it was like talking to a brick wall. They weren't listening. In their eyes, I was already guilty. I heard things like, "We didn't raise you to be a deadbeat, and how could you deny your own child?" And there I was, trying to tell them I wasn't denying anything. I wasn't the father to begin with, . It didn't matter that Sarah's story didn't add up. She had been staying with a friend in another state for the entire month when she supposedly got pregnant. When I brought that up to my parents, they just brushed it off with, "People make mistakes." But this wasn't some small mistake. This was a full-blown accusation that could destroy my future. Fast forward 6 months into Sarah's pregnancy, and by this point, my entire family had turned against me. Every dinner, every conversation, every text, it was all about how I needed to step up and take responsibility. I was losing my mind. No matter what I did or said, no one believed me. Even some of my closest friends started questioning whether I could have forgotten something. It was surreal. My parents hit me with an ultimatum. Either I man up and act like a father, or I'd be disowned. At first, I didn't take them seriously, but they weren't bluffing. When I refused to cave, they kicked me out of their lives. Just like that, I was cut off, disowned by the people who raised me, the ones who were supposed to support me. It felt like my entire world collapsed in an instant. I was angry. I was confused. I felt betrayed. I kept thinking, how could they choose to believe Sarah over their own son? My own parents turned their backs on me, threw me out like I didn't matter. It hurt more than I could put into words. Things got even more bizarre when Sarah had the baby. My mom showed up at the hospital playing the proud grandma role while I was left in the dark. Sarah still wouldn't take the paternity test, so I had to go through the legal system to get it done. When the results came in, it was exactly what I expected. 0% chance I was the father, not my kid, never had been . The moment I saw those results, I felt a mix of relief and rage. I sent the results to my parents, thinking, finally they'll see the truth. They'll realize they were wrong. But instead of the apologies I was hoping for, they started blowing up my phone with excuses. "We're so sorry," they said. "We didn't know." My dad even sent me some money in the mail, like a few $100 was going to fix everything they'd done. I kept the money. Felt like they owed me for all the emotional torment they'd put me through. But forgive them? No way. Not after what they'd done. I made it clear. I wasn't ready to let them back into my life. Not after they threw me away so easily. A few friends and even my therapist suggested I give them another chance. They're my parents, after all. But how do you forgive someone who was willing to disown you over a lie? How do you trust someone who believed a stranger over their own child? That's where I'm at now, caught between knowing I didn't do anything wrong and wondering if I should try to rebuild the relationship with my family. But every time I think about it, I remember how quickly they turned on me when I needed them most. So that's part one. Just the beginning of how my life got turned upside down over something I had absolutely nothing to do with. It doesn't get any easier from here. All right, here's where things got even messier. I thought getting the paternity test and proving I wasn't the father would be the end of all this madness. I figured my parents would realize they were wrong, Sarah would back off, and life could finally return to some semblance of normal. But of course, that's not what happened. Not even close. After the paternity test results came in and confirmed that I wasn't the father, I expected my parents to apologize. I thought they'd admit they had been wrong and we could start rebuilding the damage that had been done. But instead of relief, things got even more complicated. First off, Sarah completely lost it. Rather than accept the test results, she started telling people I had somehow faked the test or tampered with it. Yeah, you read that right. In her twisted reality, I had apparently manipulated an entire lab to rig the results in my favor. I don't even know how she thought that was possible. I'm just a regular guy, not some criminal mastermind who knows how to manipulate DNA tests. But that didn't matter to Sarah. She was determined to make me the bad guy in her story. She started telling people that I was abandoning her and the baby, spinning this whole narrative where I had tricked everyone into thinking I wasn't the father. It didn't make sense, but in a small town, rumors spread like wildfire. Before I knew it, I had people giving me dirty looks at the grocery store, like I was some kind of deadbeat dad. It was infuriating. I had the DNA test results to prove I wasn't the father, but nobody seemed to care. Sarah was out there playing the victim, and I was getting blamed for something I had nothing to do with. I've never felt more powerless in my life. It's one thing when your family turns on you, but when an entire community starts looking at you like you're a scumbag, it hits on a whole different level. My parents, well, they didn't exactly know how to handle it either. My mom started calling me, leaving these long, emotional voicemails about how she just wanted to have her family back together. She didn't even acknowledge everything that had happened. She just wanted to sweep it all under the rug, pretend like none of this ever went down. She even suggested I come over for dinner, like a few family meals could magically fix all the trust that had been shattered. It wasn't just awkward, it was insulting. After everything they put me through, they thought a couple of dinners and some forced smiles would make it all okay? No apology, no acknowledgement of how badly they messed up. Just, let's move on. It was like they didn't even realize how much damage they had caused. And here's the thing. Once you break someone's trust, it's not something you can patch up with a meal and a hug. It takes real work to rebuild that, and they weren't even willing to admit they had been wrong in the first place. Then came the ultimate insult. My dad tried to bribe me. He sent me an email offering to buy me a new car if I would just come back to the family. Can you imagine that? They thought they could buy my forgiveness. I couldn't believe how out of touch they were. I stared at that email for a good few minutes, trying to figure out if it was some kind of sick joke. But no, my dad was serious. He thought throwing money at me would make everything better. I didn't respond. What was there to say? They didn't care about fixing things the right way. They just wanted me back in their lives because it was convenient for them. And the fact that they thought money could fix everything made me realize how little they actually understood what they had done. But it didn't stop there. Sarah kept escalating things, reaching out to people I knew, trying to drag them into the drama. She even reached out to my ex-girlfriend, Amanda. We hadn't spoken in years, but suddenly I get a text from her saying we needed to talk. At first, I had no idea what she was talking about. But then she explained that Sarah had been messaging her, trying to convince her that I was some terrible person who had abandoned his child. Amanda didn't believe it, thank God, but just the fact that Sarah had gone that far made me livid. I called Sarah and told her to stop. I wasn't going to let her keep dragging me and the people around me through her mess, but she just laughed and hung up on me. It was like talking to a brick wall. She was so caught up in her delusion that nothing I said would get through to her. At that point, I seriously considered getting a lawyer involved. I didn't want to go that far, but Sarah was out here ruining my reputation. My parents were enabling her behavior, and I felt like I had no one in my corner. My closest friends were on my side, sure, but even they didn't fully understand how bad things had gotten. Eventually, I had to make a decision. I couldn't keep living in this constant state of stress, waiting for the next rumor to spread or the next accusation to come my way. I decided to cut ties, completely, not just with Sarah, but with my parents too. It wasn't easy. It sucked, actually, but I knew I had to put my own well-being first. I wrote my parents a long email explaining everything. I told them how betrayed I felt, how they had failed me when I needed them most, and how I couldn't trust them anymore. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I told them straight up that I wasn't ready to forgive them and that I didn't know if I ever would be. I made it clear that if they wanted any chance at a relationship with me in the future, they'd have to start by taking real responsibility for their actions. No more pretending everything was fine. No more sweeping things under the rug. As for Sarah, I blocked her on everything. I couldn't deal with her manipulations anymore. She wasn't my problem, and I wasn't going to let her keep dragging me into her web of lies. I even told Luke, her brother, that I couldn't be around his family for a while. That was tough because Luke's always been a good friend, but I had to prioritize my own mental health. It's been a few months since I cut them off, and honestly, it's been a relief. Sure, there are days when I feel guilty or second-guess myself, but deep down, I know I made the right call. Sometimes you have to walk away even when it hurts. It's messy and complicated, but at least now, I'm not constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next disaster to hit. I can finally breathe again. But if you had told me a year ago that I'd be in this situation, I never would have believed you. Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs you never see coming. Just when I thought cutting ties with Sarah and my parents would finally give me some peace, life decided to throw me another curveball. I had convinced myself that distancing myself from them was the end of the chaos. But oh no, things were far from over. If anything, cutting them off seemed to stir the pot even more. A couple of weeks after sending that email to my parents and blocking Sarah on everything, I got a message from Mike, an old high school buddy I hadn't spoken to in years. It seemed completely random at first, but then Mike told me something that made my stomach drop. My parents had reached out to him. Let me clarify something. Mike and I weren't even that close. We hung out in the same circles, sure, but for my parents to dig up his contact information and reach out to him, that was a huge red flag. Apparently, they had been contacting people I hadn't talked to in forever, telling them all sorts of stories, trying to get them to convince me to reconcile. They weren't just messaging old friends, they reached out to distant relatives, old co-workers, and even people I barely knew. And the worst part? They were spinning the whole thing as if I was the one who needed to apologize. My parents made it sound like I had gone off the rails, that I was in a bad place, and that they were worried about me. They weren't acknowledging the restraining order, the DNA test results, or any of the hell they'd put me through. It was all about them playing the concerned, loving parents, and me being the one causing the rift. Mike was cool about it. He saw right through their nonsense and just wanted to give me a heads up. But it didn't stop there. Over the next few days, I started getting messages from all sorts of people I hadn't spoken to in years, asking me if everything was all right. Some were genuinely concerned, but others were like, "Your parents are really worried. Maybe you should just talk to them. They're your family, after all." I was livid. Here I was, trying to distance myself from the madness, and my parents were out there doing a full-on PR campaign, trying to paint me as the bad guy. It felt like I was living in some twisted alternate reality where nothing made sense. No matter how much I tried to escape the drama, it kept creeping back into my life. The final straw? My parents reached out to my job. Yeah, you read that right. They contacted my boss. I don't even know how they got his number, but somehow they tracked him down. They called the office, told him they were worried about me, and implied that I wasn't in the right headspace to be working. Imagine my shock when my boss pulled me aside one day and asked if everything was okay at home. I was stunned. I didn't even know how to respond at first. What do you say when your boss is asking if your parents think you've lost your mind? I explained the whole situation to him, and thankfully he was understanding. He even apologized for bringing it up, but the damage was done. My own parents were now messing with my career. That was the final straw. I had no choice but to take legal action. I went to a lawyer and started the process of getting a restraining order against them. I didn't want to go this far, but what other choice did I have? They were crossing every line, invading every aspect of my life, and I had to protect myself. The legal process was long and draining. Court dates, paperwork, stress, it all took a toll. But as exhausting as it was, I felt a weird sense of relief. For the first time in a long time, I was taking control of the situation. No more letting them dictate the narrative. No more letting them manipulate everyone around me. This was my life, and I wasn't going to let them ruin it any further. Of course, when my parents found out about the restraining order, all hell broke loose. My mom sent me a long, guilt-tripping email saying things like, "I never imagined my own son would do this to me," and "Family is supposed to stick together no matter what." It was textbook manipulation. She kept saying I was the one tearing the family apart, as if I was causing all the pain, not them. But I didn't bite. I didn't respond. Things only got worse before they got better. One day I came home from work to find my car vandalized. Someone had keyed the word liar into the side of it. I didn't have proof it was my parents, but come on, who else could it have been? I hadn't told anyone about the restraining order except for a few close friends. My parents were the only ones who had a motive to pull something like that. It was their way of lashing out because they couldn't control me anymore. I filed a police report, but nothing came of it. Just another reminder that even when you try to do things the right way, sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most turn into your worst enemies. After that, I started parking my car at a friend's house and even installed security cameras around my apartment. I couldn't take any more chances. It felt like I was living in a constant state of paranoia, always waiting for the next shoe to drop. But eventually, things did start to calm down. The restraining order went through, and my parents were officially barred from contacting me or coming anywhere near my home or workplace. That was a huge weight off my shoulders. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could finally breathe. It's been a few months now, and I'm still picking up the pieces. I've had to do a lot of damage control with my friends and coworkers, explaining the full situation and making sure they knew the truth. Most of them were supportive, but some were skeptical. "Are you sure your parents would really go that far?" they'd ask. It's hard for people to believe, I get it. But when you've lived through it, you know how far some people will go when they feel like they're losing control. Looking back, I never thought things would get this bad. It's crazy how quickly family can turn on you when you refuse to play by their rules. But I've learned something important. You can't let anyone, not even your family, dictate how you live your life. Sometimes, you have to make the hard choice to walk away even when it hurts. I don't know what the future holds for me and my parents. Maybe one day they'll realize what they did and genuinely apologize. Maybe they won't. Either way, I'm done letting them control my life. I've got my own path to walk, and I'm not looking back. I thought the restraining order and cutting off contact would finally be the end of the madness. I was ready to move on, rebuild my life, and leave all the drama behind. But, of course, life had one more surprise in store for me, something I never could have predicted. A few months after the court ruled in my favor, things had finally started to settle down. I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder anymore. The messages from old friends and distant relatives had stopped, and I had managed to distance myself from the chaos. For the first time in a long time, I was beginning to feel like I could breathe again. But just when I thought I was out, my family found a way to pull me back in. One final, desperate attempt. One afternoon, I was out running errands when I ran into my cousin, Melissa. We hadn't talked much since all the drama with my parents started, and we were never super close, but I figured, why not say hi? We chatted for a bit, and at first, everything seemed normal. Small talk about work, life, the usual stuff. But then, out of nowhere, Melissa dropped a bombshell. "Did you hear what your parents are planning?" That pit in my stomach, the one that had started to fade, came roaring back. "Planning what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Melissa hesitated, like she wasn't sure she should even be telling me, but eventually she sighed and went on. "They're throwing a big family reunion next month. They've been telling everyone that it's going to be a reconciliation thing between you and them." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My parents were planning some kind of ambush family reunion, trying to force me into a public reconciliation. And the worst part? They'd been telling everyone I was going to be there, like I was in on it, like I had agreed to this. I felt the anger bubbling up inside me. It was classic manipulation, setting me up to look like the bad guy if I didn't show up. They'd invite all these distant relatives and family friends, and when I didn't show, they'd play the victim again, telling everyone how I was refusing to make peace. It was the same old tactic they'd used before, but now they were dragging the entire extended family into it. I thanked Melissa for giving me the heads up and told her straight up that I wasn't going. She understood, but I could see the conflict in her eyes. Even she seemed to be buying into my parents' narrative of, "We just want to fix things." I could tell she wanted me to go, to make things right, but there was no way I was walking into that trap that night. I went home and thought long and hard about what to do. I knew I wasn't going to the reunion, but part of me felt like I needed to say something. I couldn't just let them manipulate the situation like this without standing up for myself. So the next morning, I sat down and wrote one final email to my parents, . It wasn't long, but it was direct. I told them I knew about the reunion and I wasn't coming. I made it clear that I didn't want any part of a reconciliation that was being forced on me, especially not in front of a crowd of people. I told them that if they truly cared about fixing things, they'd have to start by respecting my boundaries. And until they could do that, there was nothing more to talk about. I didn't expect a response, and honestly, I didn't need one. I just needed to set the record straight one last time. But of course, my parents couldn't let it go. A few days later, my dad called me. I didn't pick up, but he left a long, rambling voicemail about how I was tearing the family apart and how the reunion was supposed to be a fresh start for all of us. He even tried to guilt me by saying, "Your grandparents would be so disappointed in how you're handling this." That voicemail hit me hard, not because I believed what he said, but because it reminded me of all the times my parents had used guilt and manipulation to get their way. They would pull any card they could to make me feel like I was the problem, even if it meant dragging my grandparents into it. People who had always been supportive of me, by the way. It was like they couldn't accept that maybe, just maybe, they were the ones who needed to take a long, hard look at themselves. I didn't respond to the voicemail. What was the point? I'd said my piece and I wasn't going to let them pull me back into their drama. But that didn't mean it didn't weigh on me. For days after that, I kept thinking about the reunion, about all the relatives who were going to be there, thinking I was just refusing to make peace. I wondered how many of them actually knew the full story, how many were only getting the twisted version my parents had been feeding them. The reunion came and went, and I didn't hear a word from my parents afterward. I saw some photos pop up on Facebook, smiling faces, family hugs, the whole deal. My parents were there, playing the role of the happy family, pretending like everything was perfect. It was weird seeing them like that, acting like they hadn't spent the last year trying to destroy my life. But I guess that's what they were always good at, pretending. A few weeks later, I ran into Melissa again, and she filled me in on what had gone down at the reunion. Apparently, it had been pretty awkward. A lot of people had expected me to show up, and when I didn't, there were some uncomfortable conversations. My parents had tried to explain my absence, but from what Melissa said, it didn't go over well. A few relatives even started questioning why I wasn't there and why my parents hadn't been more honest about the situation. It seemed like not everyone was buying their story after all, . And that, I guess, is where things stand now. I've managed to distance myself from the drama, but I know it's always lurking just beneath the surface. My parents will probably never admit they were wrong, and I've come to terms with that. I can't change them, but what I can do is protect myself. I've spent the last year focusing on rebuilding my life, my career, my friendships, the parts of my life that they tried to tear down. It hasn't been easy, and I won't lie. There are still days when it hurts. Cutting off your family is never simple, and there are moments when I wonder if I made the right decision. But deep down, I know I did. I had to choose myself, my mental health, my peace, my future, over the toxic cycle they kept trying to pull me into. Yeah, that's the end of this wild ride. Maybe one day things will change, maybe they won't. But either way, I'm done letting my family control my life. I've got my own path to walk now, and for the first time in a long time, I'm walking it on my own terms. And you know what? That feels pretty damn good.